The intertrial interval and practice distribution. By far, the greatest amount of research on the distribution of practice has investigated the length of the intertrial interval, which refers to the amount of rest a person has between practice trials. One of the problems confronted when trying to understand the research relates to the definition problem described earlier in this chapter. To expand on the general criteria given earlier, we will define mass practice as a practice in which the time between trials is either very brief or non-existent, resulting in relatively continuous practice. The term distribute practice refers to practice in which this is a substantial amount of time between trials or group of trials. Although the terms very short and relatively long are unclear in these definitions, they allow us to extrapolate as much as possible from the research literature on mass versus distribute practice to motor skill learning situations. A history of controversy. Although there is a lot of research on the distribution of practice as it relates to the duration of the intertrial interval, there is a considerable disagreement regarding which schedule is ideal. The argument may be seen in reviews of literature as well as motor learning textbooks, which both provide a number of solutions to the problem, the matter of distribution. There are two problems underlie the controversy surrounding this issue. First, relates to the issue of practice performance versus learning effects. Many of the experiments on mass versus distribute practice did not include retention or transfer trials. The second problem is that researchers generally have failed to consider that the two practice distribution schedules may have different learning effects on different types of skills. Their conclusion was that the type of task was an important variable in determining practice distribution effects for schedules related to the length of intertrial rest intervals. More especially, Leah and Genovese 1988 to 1989 provided evidence that the type of practice distribution schedules that results in better learning depends on whether the skills is continuous or discrete. We will look at each of these types of skills. First, continuous skills. Continuous skills have been the most common type of motor skills used to investigate the effect of mass versus distribute practice between trials. And the most popular task has been the rotary pursuit task, in which a person must keep a handheld stylus in contact with a small disc on a rotating turntable for as long as possible. What makes this type of task useful for investigating the issue of mass versus distribute practice is that it is quite simple. To specify mass and distribute intertrial interval lengths, mass practice schedules typically have few, if any, seconds of rest between trials, whereas the intervals in distribute schedules are as long as or longer than the trials themselves. Lee and Genovese 1988 review found that the consistent result has been that distribute schedules lead to better learning than mass schedules for learning continuous motor skills. Then moving on to discrete skills. When researchers use discrete skills to investigate the issue of intertrial mass versus distribute practice, a problem arises that is directly related to the definition problem we discussed earlier. If a mass schedule allows no rest between trials, whereas a distributed schedule involves a rest interval that is at the same length as the practice trial, then the two contrasted intertrial intervals will be essentially the same length because a distinct response is typically very short. Lee and Genovese 1988 found only one study in the research literature that used a discrete task. Caron 1969. The results of this study and one subsequently reported by Lee and Genovese 1989 provided evidence that mass practice schedules result in better learning for discrete motor skills.